Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Bill.
Thank you. I'll cross a bit of the carrot here. So we're going to open the meeting. We actually haven't got a quorum at this stage. We're waiting for a couple of people to turn up, but we can still receive reports from them. But we'll start the meeting. So Dave, you can do a carrot for us, please. Oh, Liz. Oh, well, James.
Okay.
We'll defer to you.
You want to, James?
Would you like to, or you have a
I know a different one, but it's much longer.
You turn your microphone on, James. Oh, we've got anyone.
We're on text, by the way.
And we're live recording.
Yeah.
I'll do this one. Kia ora koutou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai, he hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, te hei mauri ora.
So we'll just do the apologies, shall we?
Yes, sorry. I'm trying to get into Teams and it says on working. I wonder if Teams is working right. So yes, apologies. We have lost them now. My one. Angela Kushney, Claire Buchanan, Jen Despar, Ian McKenzie, and Mia Brown. All apologies. So at the moment, we don't appear to have a quorum. So what we're proposing, do you want to talk to this, Bill?
No, you go.
What we're proposing is we will bring our presentations forward and do our official business later if another member turns up. So we will start with you guys, Tina and Tom. Yes, sit there, and if you could use your microphones, then people online can hear.
So, Tina and Tom, so you're going to give us an update on the Ashburton Lakes water quality monitoring, that's correct? Great, so if you just introduce yourselves and the floor is yours, thanks.
There? Okay, is that better? Yeah, cool. Sweet. Shall we do that again? Yes. Okay, so for the record, Tina Byatt, freshwater scientist with Environment Canterbury.
And Tom Drennan, freshwater technical advisor with the Department of Conservation in Christchurch.
Great, so we've been asked to provide a water quality update on our monitoring data for the streams and lakes of the Otawharakai, the Ashburton Lakes Basin. So just to start off with a reminder that there were concerns raised about lake water quality a couple of years back, actually in this forum, and that's resulted in a series of action aimed to hold and reverse the decline in water quality in the lakes and streams in the basin. So this is not an exclusive list, but one of the actions was to establish the Otawharakai Working Group, which includes the Department of Conservation, Fish and Game, Runanga, the Ashburton District Council, and the local farmers and a number of other members. We've also started doing more intensive and more extensive some additional monitoring. Commissioned some catchment modellings to estimate load reductions needed for the lakes to meet the targets and objectives set in the Land and Water Regional Plan, and voluntary actions on the ground to reduce the nutrient losses to the lakes. But where we're at the moment is that the lakes are failing to meet most water quality limits and objectives, and we need large nutrient reductions to meet those plan limits. I'll pass on to Tom.
Thank you. So we'll jump straight into the stream water quality data, and this is the data that the Department of Conservation collects on a monthly basis. So you'll see on the map behind you here, there's a number of green points. Each one of those 12 points is one of our sampling sites. So we collect water quality from each of those 12 sites on a monthly basis, and all sites are sampled on the one day. So we take grab samples and we send the water the water samples to Hill Labs in Christchurch, who actually analyse that, and then send us back the results. You see 3 blue outlines there. They're 3 of the lake catchments delineated. So you can see Lake Heron on top, Maori Lakes in centre, and kind of the bottom left there is Lake Clearwater. You'll see one of the sites kind of sticks out on its own, Paddle Hill Creek, and that's our reference site. So that site drains entirely conservation land. It's a stewardship area in between kind of Dogs Hill there and Peak Hill. So there's no real active land use in that, so that should reflect, you know, pretty baseline conditions. So without further ado, I'll jump into some of the data. So this is a multi-panel plot. There's 12 plots there. Each plot, so each one of those panels represents a single site. And the horizontal axis, so on the bottom of each graph, that is the date. So the data runs from about 2012 through to current day, 2022. And on the y-axis, so the vertical axis of each panel, that represents the concentrations of, in this case, nitrate at each site. Just before kind of discussing some of the data in detail, you'll see that the 4 sites in the Maori Lakes catchment, Clent Hills, Jacobs, Gentleman Smith, and the Maori Lakes outlet, they've got the most data. So they've been sampled from 2012, so it's about 10 years of data for those sites. And Paddle Hill Creek as well is our baseline site, like I was saying on the bottom left there, and that's been sampled for about a comparable period. I suppose just starting with Paddle Hill, our reference site, which is important, you can see that the concentrations of nitrate recorded at that site through time remain incredibly low, just above the method detection limits really for the laboratory, and there has been no increase in concentrations over that time. They've remained, you know, consistently low. Whereas if you were to compare that with the likes of the samples from Gentleman Smith Stream, you can see at the beginning the monthly samples, which are represented by, you know, individual green points. Back in 2012, there were samples results coming in for nitrate at around 3 to kind of 500 milligrams per meter cubed, whereas in recent times some of those results are coming in at over 1 milligram per litre. So there's been a 3 to 4-fold increase. So they're quite high concentrations for a stream in this environmental setting, especially up so high. You can see the blue trend line, so there's been quite a significant increase over that 10-year period. There's also been increases at Jacobs Stream as well as Maori Lakes Outlet. Not quite as strong a rate of change as we've seen at Gentleman Smith Stream, but nevertheless concerning. The other sites that you can see on the right-hand side of the panel, and the Mellish and Triangle and the Clearwater Outlet, we only kind of brought those onto our monitoring program in 2019, late 2019, so there's not as much data available for those, and we can't really read into the trends of those sites yet. You can see, though, that there is an apparent difference between some of the sites. Dunbar Stream, for example, seems to have higher nitrate concentrations on occasions. So that's probably about as much as I can say for nitrate for now. This is the same idea again, but this time we're showing phosphorus concentrations, total phosphorus at the same stream sites. I suppose the biggest thing you'll notice straight away is that there is a more spread in the data. It's a bit more variable, which isn't too surprising because phosphorus tends to be associated with sediment. So if you get storm events, you'll tend to have a little bit more sediment come into the streams from runoff, and that could bring with it phosphorus, because they tend to kind of co-associate to a degree. But unlike nitrate, there is some declining trends here, which is nice to see. In Gentleman Smith, it's quite obvious. You can see kind of a more that trend line is decreasing, and there's less spread in the data in more recent times. And the same can be said with the Maori Lakes Outlet as well. Over the last couple of years, there's been a somewhat decreasing trend, but for the rest, there's quite a bit of a spread of data. Clent Hills has some, quite high samples values on occasions, and for Clearwater Outlet, that big increase and that kind of reduction that you're seeing over the last 2 to 3 years there, that's probably reflecting the cyanobacterial bloom in the lake. So those high values were when the lake was in bloom and discharging some of that algae-laden water into the Lambay stream. And once again, there's not a lot yet to be said about the sites in the Clearwater and Heron catchments, because we don't really have a long time record for them as of yet, but nevertheless there is some variability, but there is differences. You can see Mellish Stream, which also drains, I think, conservation land, has kind of consistently lower values, whereas the likes of Oliver Stream and Dunbar as well, they have on occasion, the same with Whiskey Stream, some higher values. So this plot is kind of bringing together the trends for all of the water quality, or at least the parameters kind of I suppose, of most concern. This is aggregating trends over the 10-year period from 2012 to current day, up to data for about April 2022. So on the bottom, you've got the water quality parameters, the four of them: nitrate, total nitrogen, total phosphorus, and total suspended solids. TSS in this graph, it can really be seen as a kind of a proxy for sediment concentrations, suspended sediment concentrations, and on the vertical axis, you've got the individual sites. So the easiest way to interpret it is anything in red where it's exceptionally unlikely that the concentration is improving. So to put that probably a bit more plain English, anything in red is seeing a deterioration in water quality, and vice versa. Anything in green is seeing an improvement, so a reduction in concentrations of these contaminants. I suppose the big story from this graph really is that we're seeing increasing nitrogen concentrations of both nitrate and total nitrogen at the three sites in the Murray Lakes catchment, which we could have seen from the previous multi-panel plots too. So that's Gentleman Smith, Jacobs and Murray Lakes. And that's been quite a significant trend over the last 10-year period. I suppose some good news on this graph, which is consistent across most sites, is that we are seeing a reduction in phosphorus at all sites. I should state that these trend assessments don't tell you the rate of change, but they tell you the confidence that we have that the trend is either increasing or decreasing. But nevertheless, there's some I suppose some cause for optimism there with phosphorus concentration decreasing. Suspended sediments is a bit more of a mixed bag. We are seeing decreasing suspended solids at Gentleman Smith Stream, whereas we appear to be seeing a somewhat of an increasing trend at Murray Lakes Outlet. And for the other sites, we haven't really got much confidence in the trends, so there's not really much more to say about that, I think. I'll pass over to Tina to talk about the lake water quality.
Thanks. So that's a map of the catchment again, this time showing our lake water quality monitoring sites. So there's 8 sites in the catchment. There's 2 at the Murray Lakes, and 1 at Lake Huron, Lake Emily, Lake Clearwater, Lake Camp, Lake Emma, and Lake Denny at the bottom there. And these sites have been sampled since 2005 for most lakes and 2008 for 2 or 3 other lakes. And this is part of our long-term high country lakes monitoring program. So we only sample 5 months every year, but we've got a really nice long-term data set. Oops, sorry. I first want to show you the results for the Trophic Level Index. So the Trophic Level Index is a summary index made out of the amount of algae in the lake and made out of total phosphorus and total nitrogen. So it's really an overall summary of the sort of grade of nutrient enrichment and therefore a proxy for lake health. And the red lines in that graph, again, we've got a multi-panel graph with the 8 lakes, and the red lines in the graphs are the limits and outcomes that are set in the Land and Water Regional Plan. And you can see immediately that all the lakes are actually tracking above those outcomes, which means the TLI is too high, which means we have too many nutrients and algae in those lakes. And the other thing you can see that's quite striking is that there is some pretty rapid change going on in a number of lakes, particularly Lake Clearwater and Lake Huron. We've had a transition in Lake Huron over the last 7 years from being a very clear, very nutrient poor oligotrophic system into the eutrophic band, which is really quite nutrient enriched and very not typical for a lake that size in the high country at all. And similarly for Lake Clearwater, the rate of change hasn't been that high, but we had a TLI in the supertrophic range last year, which is comparable to the likes of Lake Forsyth, sort of a more coastal lake in a very different environment. So those are probably the 2 lakes that stand out as primary concerns at the moment. There's also a little bit of a silver lining in there. So Lake Denny, which has been quite severely nutrient enriched in the past, is kind of on a downwards trajectory and showing some improvement. And we're not seeing a lot of change in some of the other lakes. So just wanted to show you the results for chlorophyll A. So chlorophyll A is a part of the TLI. That's why the patterns you're seeing there are comparable. But because the TLI is not a linear index, it works on a log scale, they're kind of somewhat dampened, the trends you're seeing in a way. And again, you can see that, again, we've got a line in the graph there that represents the objectives in the Land and Water Regional Plan. Most lakes are tracking above those, and that we are seeing a vast rate of increase in lake heron. And this is important, looking at the algae in the lake, because they're really the basis of what goes on in a lake. They're the basis of the system, and they determine that, in a way, the amount of food available, the type of food available, the clarity of the water, the oxygen in the water, and so on. And so this is really starting to see the degradation rather than just looking at the nutrients. So this is similar to the graph that Tom has shown you for the streams. Not quite as pretty, but I've used the same colours. So the red bars are really seeing a very lightly degrading trend. Green and blue are improving. And you can see that we are seeing an increase in algae biomass in the majority of the lakes. And that's also reflected in increasing nutrients in some lakes, but not in others. So this could really mean that we are still seeing, even though the nutrients are decreasing in some lakes, we're still seeing the algae increase, which points to there being a bit of a delay or lag in the response between reducing nutrients and reducing your algae. So I just wanted to spend a little bit more time on both Lake Clearwater and Lake Heron, because they're the two lakes that did really stand out looking at the TLI data. And you're all aware that we had very high amount of algae and nutrients in the lake in summer 2020-21, which resulted in the fact that we had to even put out a health warning because there was a lot of cyanobacteria in the lake. We then tested the cyanobacteria and they turned out not to be toxin producing, but still there is still cyanobacteria in the lake. And that big increase in algae sort of started, as you can see, so in 2021, 2022, so the summer before, where we had the health warning. And you can see down in the plot there, there's TLI. I'm not sure if that cursor works. Oh, so we've got, yeah, can you see it? So we've got TLI, total nitrogen, the algae biomass is chlorophyll A, and TP here. And this is a really quite striking increase in chlorophyll A here. And that's also reflected in the nutrients. And what it has also done is it's resulted in quite a loss of clarity in the lake. So the algae are essentially now shading out the plants that are growing on the bottom of the lake. And that can have really quite strong consequences, because if the plants at the bottom of the lakes lose their light, they can no longer grow and they will eventually die off. And that stops them from performing some really important functions. So that all the macrophytes or plants that are growing at the bottom of the lake, they are really important in not just providing habitat, but also in stabilizing the sediment in the lake, and particularly in a lake like Lake Clearwater, which is actually quite shallow for most of its area. And really windy places, really popular for windsurfing. It's really important to have that stabilization of the sediment, because if you lose the plants and the sediment gets mobilized, you have another factor that decreases your clarity, and you can get into this real feedback loop of no plants and too many algae, and it's really hard to get back out of that. So moving on to Lake Heron, again we've seen a very strong increase in algae in the past sort of 5 to 8 years, and this is now at a point where actually it was even last year. So those chlorophyll A concentrations or algae concentrations are actually above the national bottom line for lakes now, for both Clearwater and Heron. I forgot to mention that before. So it's now at the point where we're starting to see real effects, not just on the clarity, but also on ecosystem processes such as the dissolved oxygen near the lake bed. And the lake is visibly more turbid when you go swimming there. And again, we're having some concerns for the deeper beds of the macrophytes of the aquatic plants. And what's quite interesting in Lake Heron is that we have been out on the lake now for the last year and a half, nearly 2 years, sampling it by boat monthly. And we have been finding that the community, so the type of algae that are present, are really dominated by this one particular species, which is called Serratium, and it's a known nuisance algae. It's not a cyanobacteria, but so it can't fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, but it is really incredibly efficient at using the nutrients that are in the lake. So it can travel to the deeper parts of the lake and pick up nutrients there and then go up to the surface and photosynthesize. It can also eat bacteria, which is unusual for algae. So it's really adapted to using up nutrients very efficiently. And once it grows in big numbers in a lake, you have a really big problem. But this species has been in the lake in sort of 2010, 2011 as well, and we still had really low biomass of algae. So something obviously happened to trigger this big shift in the community there. So that's sort of a summary of our long-term data for the lakes. And I think you've been provided with a list like this from the Otawharakai working group in the July update, sort of on what else is happening in the catchment on top of our regular monitoring. But I'll just quickly take you through again. So there's been a lot more intensive on-lake monitoring happening, particularly on Lake Clearwater and Lake Heron. We have installed a number of continuous monitoring devices in the lakes as well as in Gentleman Smith Stream, where we have placed a nitrogen logger. And we have paid more attention to Lake Clearwater and looked at the inflow stream into the lake, and also at the shallow groundwater that drains from Lake Camp towards Lake Clearwater under the Hut settlement. There's been a Kakahi survey, a freshwater mussel survey conducted by the Department of Conservation last year. Tom will talk a bit about some stream and vertebrate sampling. Doc has done this summer, and sorry that slipped off the slide there. Really important part. There has been a resurvey of the cultural health monitoring in the catchment this summer, led by the Runanga. And I apologise, the fonts went all funky when we pulled it up on this computer. So just one slide quickly, sort of a summary of some of the findings from those extra monitoring efforts. So first of all, there were quite big concerns that last rainfall event we had last year in May, June would have delivered a big pulse of nutrients to the lakes and kind of made the problem worse. But we didn't really find any evidence of that happening, with the possible exemption of Lake Ema. For the nitrate recorder on Gentleman Smith Stream, so that records nitrate concentrations every 15 minutes, and it's been giving us really nice data and lines really well up with the lab samples as well. And we're seeing quite high nitrate at base flow, and we've also done additional sampling a couple of years back that showed there's high nitrate in the spring heads around the area. So that's probably sustaining that high nitrate at base flow, and we are seeing large drops in nitrate concentration with any rainfall, big rainfall events. For Lake Clearwater, we have found evidence of contaminants in the groundwater, but it's not consistent. So it's not consistent between sites, and it's not consistent over time. So they're quite spiky peaks in the data. So we are looking at the data more closely, and we're also collecting additional information before we can make any sort of conclusions on loads to the lake from the groundwater. And we've also been quite consistently finding that the concentrations of nutrients in the inflow streams are lower than those in the lake, slightly lower. But that comes with a bit of a disclaimer that we've only sampled those that inflow stream when it was a base flow, so not during floods, which have the potential to deliver more nutrients.
Thanks, Tina. So just to give you an overview of some of the this work that DOC has commissioned over the last wee while. So last summer, DOC commissioned NIWA to repeat the Kakihi surveys that they did back in 2012. So back in 2012, NIWA surveyed quite a few lakes up in the basin to just quantify and get an idea about the status of the freshwater mussels in terms of the numbers that are there, the densities, the size of these mussels. And they undertook those surveys at the same sites that they did new mussels to be present at from previous lakes by, so these kind of lake macrophyte type surveys. So what we did last year, in February time in 2021, asked NIWA to repeat those surveys at 8 of the lakes that were previously done in 2012. Overall, these surveys actually were undertaken by divers in most lakes, so that's quite an intensive couple of days. The overall results for 6 of the 8 lakes, there was really no change in the population kind of size structure of freshwater mussels or their general size as well, and abundance. There were 2 noticeable decreases in population kind of sizes, in terms of density at least. One was at Lake Emily, and that was a 60% decline. And the other was at Maury Lake West, which is at the back Maury Lake, where there was a 17% decline. You'll see an asterisk in front of the Lake Emily figure there because only two of the 4 sites at Lake Emily were surveyed last year, just due to time constraints. Ended up being a very long day, and we just weren't able to get around to the other sites 3 and 4. So I wouldn't read into that result a lot. Freshwater mussels are kind of notoriously patchy to survey. They're quite difficult to actually get a really good handle on. Ideally, you'd like to sample even more sites in the lake, but for 2, they can be quite mobile, so there's every chance that they could have just may not have been at the site. So yeah, I wouldn't read into that result too much. This report actually is available online on the DOC website if anyone wants to see more information. One thing that was apparent during the surveys, you'll see here on the bottom right, this is a freshwater mussel individual from Lake Clearwater, and this isn't a healthy mussel by any means. You'll see the kind of banding there, it's quite thick, so this is called thickening. This is caused by what we believe to be a particular little fly larvae getting in between the layers of the shell. We don't know the exact reason for it, but it kind of is an indication of stress. It may be associated with some of the water quality kind of current concerns at Lake Clearwater. That definitely wouldn't be helping Kaki, especially if the oxygen concentrations were to be lower on the lake bed, where these individuals tend to be. And one thing that remained consistent with 2012 is that there's been a kind of concerning absence. We haven't been picking up very many juvenile kakihi, so juvenile mussels less than 30 to 40 mil in length. This isn't unique just to the Ashburton Lakes. It's kind of New Zealand wide that juvenile kakihi are kind of in decline, and some of these populations may be aging, and we're not sure if there's much active recruitment. There's also a bit of a theory that they may be living in different parts of the lake or even in different streams and feeding into the lake through time, but nevertheless, it's concerning that with this amount of survey effort, we found very few juveniles. So that's an ongoing concern for the kaki populations. This is work that's currently ongoing. So we repeated some surveys that were done back in 2008, between 2008 and 2012. These were done by a whole pile of different people. DOC took charge of some of them and subcontracted out some others. So these are stream health surveys. So these kind of involve looking at the invertebrates that live in the stream, these animals that live on the stream bed, taking samples of those and analysing them, and they give you a good indication of what's going on in the stream, and they're a very good indicator of stream health because they're living in the stream full time. Unlike taking a grab water quality sample, these animals are there on an ongoing basis, so they will reflect water quality over a longer period of time. So they'll give you an indication of the stream health. And also, if you look within the data, kind of look at it in a bit more detail, you'll get an indication if there is particular stressors like sediment or nutrients affecting a stream or maybe flow. It'll give you a bit of an indication as to what might be affecting the quality of a stream at a particular site. So we Repeated the service this summer. There was about 40 odd site samples, the ones in pink there and yellow. That survey work is complete and the analysis actually is currently ongoing, and we're expecting those results to be complete and reported on by about, I think, late October time. So once that's available, we'll be able to share that data. So that will hopefully be able to kind of tell us, number one, what the current state of these stream sites are in terms of stream health. And also we'll be able to compare that with the same sites that were surveyed back over 10 to 12 years ago, and see if there's been any changes in the stream health over that period.
Okay, yeah, so just to sum up the presentation, so we've got the lakes failing to meet most of the land and water regional plan objectives in the summer season. So that we have particular concerns for Lake Clearwater and Lake Heron. We've got a very visible loss of clarity in those lakes. We've seen a shift in algae communities to nuisance algae such as dinoflagellates or cyanobacteria for Lake Clearwater. And this is posing a real risk to the aquatic plant and kind of goes along the path of what we call a lake flipping, which might have been a term we've heard before, which is when the lake reaches that state where it loses aquatic plants and just maintains a large mass of algae. And we are seeing increasing algae in the majority of lakes, but those increases are of varying magnitude, so they're quite large in Heron and Clearwater and much smaller in other lakes. We do need large nutrient reductions to meet those the lake objectives set in the Land and Water Regional Plan. And I think we can also see a delay in the response between that load reduction and the reduction in algae in some lakes. And those delays might be different for lakes depending on how far they've sort of travelled towards a more degraded state. And I think lastly, all this information that we are collecting will help inform any action plans on the ground and any of the really good work that goes on in the catchment at the moment, working on fire mitigation. And I don't know if there's a plan to provide you an update on the sort of actual action that happens on the ground at the moment. It's not something we will cover here. And yeah, there's 2 extra slides in the back of that presentation just with the nutrient graphs for the lake, but I won't go through them, but we'll include them in the PDF pack for you to look at. So, any questions?
That's it. So we've got any questions?
Sorry.
Shouldn't be a presenter's one.
Okay. Right.
Well, excellent presentation. Thank you, Tom. Have we got some questions? Yep, Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I've got 3. With your graphs regarding nitrates or nitrite on the lakes, where does 500, that's a different gauge to what I'm used to. I'm used to 1 or 6.5 or whatever. Where does 500 sit?
Oh, to be sure.
So it's just a matter of units, really. So 500 would be 0.5. So this is 500 micrograms per litre, which is 0.5 milligrams per litre.
Yep.
Just to put it into perspective, when we do lake data, we tend to use milligrams per litre because the nutrients are usually lower than what you see in a low-lit stream. So it's kind of convention around lakes to use them micrograms per litre, so we've tried to keep that consistent in the presentation to also use that for streams. So micrograms per litre is the same as milligrams per cubic metre, just to make it even more confusing. So it's a factor of 1,000 really. It's just a different unit.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know, because that task force set up, they wanted to have the figure for all freshwater in New Zealand. Well, you're about half that, aren't you? So it's actually, are these not quite low?
Well, it depends what you're comparing it to. If you look at Paddle Hill Creek down there, so that would be what you would naturally expect in that environment. So one is, so the objectives that are set, well, the limits that are set in the national policy statement for freshwater, for nitrogen, they actually run toxicity. So they run nitrate toxicity. So they are based on how much nitrate you need to actually start killing things. Whereas, especially if the water then goes into the lake, we are concerned about them as nutrients, so as a source for algae and aquatic plants to grow in the lakes. And then your objectives are a lot lower, because you're not looking at when you actually start killing fish, you're looking at when you start growing lots of algae, and unfortunately they are a lot lower. So we don't really have any. So that's why in the NPSFM for lakes we have a total nitrogen limit. And I'll just go to the back of the presentation, and there are, again, they are a lot lower. So this is it's 160 micrograms per litre, so 0.16 milligrams per litre of nitrogen you want in a relatively low nutrient high country lake. So that's the sort of the concentrations we need to achieve in the streams going into the lakes as well, to keep those lakes healthy, really. So it is really tricky, because people are used to really high concentrations. Well, what I, as a lake ecologist, think are really high concentrations of nitrate being quite normal. But when you go into quite a sensitive high country environment, you just don't get away with those sort of concentrations and still maintain healthy ecosystems.
I've got another question. When you were talking about Clearwater, you said the input from the streams was a lot lower than the actual lake, but there was quite a high concentration coming in from under the huts. Well, we know the flow is from camp to Clearwater, and with the last rainfall there was a big flood in camp flowing through underground to Clearwater. Does that mean that is the majority of the contamination is coming from under the huts rather than the streams round about? If they are lower than what the lake is, surely where's it getting it from?
I don't think we've got quite enough data to make a statement like that. So when we have only sampled the inflow stream at low flows, so with a stream you usually get pulses of nutrients after high rainfall events in higher flows, which is not when we sample the stream, because we sample as part of a helicopter flight to make things work smoother. So in the data from what we're getting under the huts really just shows that there's spikes in nutrients, but it doesn't really, we're not at a point yet where we can work out the load. I think with more data collection and with help from our Groundwater team to really crunch the numbers, we can come up with a bit more of a number of how much we're estimating is lost from the settlement to the lake, but we can't really say that yet. And the other, the other, and we've only sampled one inflow stream as well, and the other factor that you can get in lakes, particularly if they've had past events of high nutrient loading, is you can actually get a lot of recycling of nutrients from the lake bed as well, which may also be something that's happening on Lake Clearwater at the moment. So, sorry, that was a long-winded answer to say we can't really tell with any certainty just yet, but we're working on it.
Yeah.
Well, why did you actually have it there? You said that the streams flowing in were lower than the lake and the contamination looked to be... Why did you put that in if that's not correct?
Well, it is correct.
Well, you just said that it wasn't.
No, I'm just saying it's not, and we can't quite take that statement and work out an allocation of the amount things are contributing. This is just what our data shows, that we are seeing lower concentrations in the inflow stream than in the lake this summer, but there was only over 5 summer months, and that we are picking up those spikes in nutrients under the groundwater. So it is too early to tell to make that any further, but I thought it would be nice to share that information at this stage.
Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, no, and it's good that you've picked up on needing to test the water going under the huts, because until we actually conclude it one way or the other, it's always a suspicion on those hut holders, so,
Yeah.
or the farmer, whichever way. So science is always our friend. One day it will tell us exactly where we've got to go and find the problem.
Yeah, and there has been a lot of work actually going on over summer at the huts. So they've had, I think, till September, to December or February this year now, to replace their long drops with holding tanks. So I think maybe someone from ADC can get a better update, but I think that's mostly or totally complete now. So hopefully that's another thing we'll pick up with monitoring the groundwater is over time, whether that has made a difference to what we've sort of seen earlier before that transition was complete.
Yep, cool. Hey, so anyhow, main part of my question is about some local context. And a lot of these graphs that you've got there, and there's also a part there I want to know about, where does the local context fit in around introduced bird species? There's a huge amount of, whether it be Canadian geese, they cut and carry phosphorus, for example, and deposit it in the lakes. And so have you been testing any or doing any E. coli tracking as to what is the, is there any nutrient build up from introduced birds or pest species? Because there's a massive population up there doing that.
Yeah, so there is some waterfall monitoring going on every year. There's a winter survey undertaken for a ground-based dock survey with some helpers that do waterfall counts at all lakes over, I think, a weekend in the wintertime. And there's also Fish and Game undertake a flyover survey in a fixed wing. They do that around the mould period, so I think is it just after Christmas, I think. So that gives us a bit of an indication of bird numbers at least twice a year. And on top of that as well, recently we've actually created this kind of repository for any observations from local landowners as well, so that if they are seeing more Canadian geese, say in the Murray Lakes catchment, that can be recorded, so we can factor that into some of the modelling work we're doing that's informing the nutrient load reductions needed for some of these areas. Very briefly, so there has been previous work done before looking at the contributions of waterfowl, predominantly the bigger waterfowl. It makes sense that they're going to give more of a contribution of nutrients, and we've done some modelling work before, and that was updated recently as well, and that shows for the majority of lakes, at least for nitrogen, they're a very minor contribution. We realise there's a bit of variability around the bird numbers. We don't have perfect data, but nevertheless, running scenarios, it looks like that their contribution is very, very minor in comparison to catchment sources from other land use. So, yeah, we're building a bigger picture of that, and that's being fed into the loss reduction kind of targets that will be needed for these lakes to meet their limits. So they're definitely not being forgotten about, and we're getting an increasing kind of more accurate picture of their numbers and their contributions through time. So
okay, no, that's cool. So the next one is
just a quick note on the fecal source tracking. So you actually need a lot of E. coli for that tracking to work, and we've done a little bit of E. coli monitoring on the lakes, and they tend to be quite low. So I don't think we would actually get enough material to do the tracking for those matters. Yep. I think at least not for the lakes.
So in your data though, there's no temperature. Are the lakes warming up, cooling down, or are they pretty standard sort of temperature between years rather than, I know it goes up and down during the seasons, but have you got any information around that?
I have a little bit of information, but not really.
Because temperature is a big driver of the.
It is, and I think that is one of the reasons we are now starting to install more and more continuous lake monitoring stations around the regions and around New Zealand as well, because I think that is a real gap in some data long term but you need pretty accurate continuous readings to really make any comments on changes in temperature. So we do collect temperature data when we sample the lakes, but we're not always at every lake at the same time. Every year, every month, there is day-to-day variation. So if you just got a one-off temperature sample once a month over 10 years, it doesn't really give you enough data to really make a comment on whether the temperature is changing or not.
Okay. And just one last question. You mentioned one of the lakes or one of the rivers has got a very high nitrate source, and it's coming out of native land. Was it out of native land? Because you said it was quite high, so I was just wondering if you could tell a bit more about what you know about why is it so high.
So just going back to the graph here, this is the nitrate again. So the call it the native site, the reference site is Paddle Hill Creek, and you can see there that that's incredibly low concentrations, what we would expect for a particular stream that's draining conservation land. The site that's highest there is actually Gentleman Smith Stream, and that's sampled. A bit more context actually on that side. That prior to 2019, that site was sampled directly upstream of where Clent Hills flowed in. So you can see Clent Hills has actually got much lower nitrate concentrations. After 2019, we switched and we sampled Gentleman Smith further downstream, which means we're actually getting an increased dilution from some of that cleaner, in terms of nitrate at least, that cleaner water coming from Clent Hills. So that concentration you're seeing in Gentleman Smith Stream, I would be very confident to say would be much higher had it been in the same position previously. So you'll see there from 2019 there's a bit of a reduction. Had we, just because of practicalities, we had to change where we're sampling, but that trend at that site is probably increasing even further. So no, there's nothing to suggest that there's much nitrate coming from conservation land. There's another example would be Mellish Stream, which is on the far side of Lake Heron. It's on the, let me get this right now, is it on the kind of northern side, if that's the correct direction, and that's draining conservation land as well predominantly. So you can see there's very low concentrations of nitrate for Mellish Stream as well.
Okay, guys, thanks for your presentation. I had just two follow-up questions. The first is on phosphorus, and the way I read those graphs was that phosphorus levels are declining in general, or are improving. Do we have any reasons as to why that might be? What practices are contributing to that? That seems to be a good story.
Yeah, it is a good story. Yeah, no, it absolutely is. There's definitely less variability through time. To kind of apply a process to the pattern of why we're seeing these improvements, every site is going to be a little bit different, of course. There might be, it would be site specific. I'd only be speculating not to say why we're seeing some of these improvements. I would imagine removing, maybe stock access and stuff.
Yeah, but in general, if there's improvement to stock access, repair and protection, any protection from erosion, that would help reduce the phosphorus and the sediment as well. But it can also be quite climate driven. We've had a number of quite dry years before we had these really wet years. But I think there is some encouraging work going on for riparian protection for stock exclusion up in the basin that we might be starting to see there with phosphorus.
Great, thank you. And following on, under the lake water quality graphs you had, while it's concerning to see clear water in here and getting worse, it appears, it looked like Denny and Māori East sites were improving somewhat. And a similar question as to whether or not there's any indications to what might be driving that improvement for those two particular sites. Yeah, so Lake Denny was in a pretty bad state about 5 years ago. So it was really kind of in the hypertrophic band. So it was looking very brown, very clear. Very brown, very green. It had lost most of its macrophyte, and it was actually in a devegetated state for a while. There was no macrophytes in the lake, and since then it has really started to clear up. The macrophytes have grown back, so that is really encouraging. And again, I think that is partly a reflection of what happened in the catchment upstream. And for the Māori East Lake, it's a little bit more complicated to look at the Māori East Lake with traditional water quality monitoring for lakes. Don't want to get too technical, but it is a lake that is a little bit more stream-like, so it actually only holds the water for 3 or 4 days, so the water flows through it pretty quickly, so it's nearly too fast to get a big response in algae growing to the nutrients. So that's why I'll just go back to some of the stream graphs. So we've got the Māori Lakes outlet here,
and we actually still have pretty high concentration of nitrate in that. So we've still got like 300 milligrams per litre of nitrate in a lake outlet, and that is a lot, and that shows that the nutrients aren't actually being fully processed in that lake. Whereas if you look at the graphs for Lake Stream, which is the outlet stream of Lake Huron, or the Clearwater outlet at the top there, Lambie Stream, there's pretty much no nitrate in there because it gets taken up in the lake and converted into total, and then measured as total nitrogen as part of the algae biomass in there. So it's a bit of a different system, just going back there. And the other thing that happens in that East Murray Lake is that you get a lot of growth, not of aquatic plants, but macroalgae. So these are sort of funny algae that aren't suspended in the water column, but they grow attached to the lake bed. So that's not something we'll pick up with our normal GLI sampling, and that's not something we'll pick up when we look at the macrophytes with the lake spice surveys, which is something we do about every 5 years. So it's a little bit more tricky to monitor, but we are seeing decreasing trends in phosphorus in that Murray East Lake. And I go to this one, the Murray Front Lake. So we're seeing some improvement in phosphorus, which is also what we've seen for Gentleman Smith Stream, which is the stream going into the Murray Lakes, and which is probably driving that decrease in TLI. So yeah. Hopefully that was helpful.
You mentioned that there are spikes under the Clearwater huts. Are you able to collect data on hut usage to see if there is correlation between the number of people on site and those spikes?
We will try to do that. Yes.
Question online, I think. Sydney, have you got a question?
Hello.
Hello.
That was a great presentation. Thank you very much. Just following up what Adi just asked about the spikes under the Clearwater huts. You mentioned that you were going to do additional monitoring. Are you? Do you mean you're going to do additional parameters, or is the frequency of sampling to trying to explain those spikes?
No, I guess what I mean is that we will continue with that monitoring till we have a whole year's worth of data, and we have collected some. We're collecting some data there so we know we're not doing anything. We're not putting anything new in, I guess, to start with, but we have some recorders in those piezometers that record the level of the water and the temperature, and we haven't quite analysed all that data yet, and we need a bit more analysis on that data, and we might stick some additional sensors in there if we think that will give us good information, like looking at conductivity. But we won't do anything visibly different, and we will continue to sample it on a monthly or bi-monthly frequency.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Good. Well, thank you very much, both your presenters. There's one more question. Val?
I've got a question. Last summer we walked up the Potts River and noticed that on the true left of the river there was quite a lot of slime. And so I sent some photos in to ECAM, and they were going to sample them, the river, and get back to me with some results, and I haven't heard anything. I wondered if you knew anything about that.
I know there was planned to be a field visit, but I haven't managed to find out yet what came of that, so we will. I'll chase that up. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Val. So it's good. The information there on the graphs and everything obviously takes a bit to absorb because there's so much detail there, and as a layperson to be quite good to have a summary one in a bar graph or something, just the key parameters and maybe measuring, the rainfall ones and the phosphates and just an overall one that's sort of a go-to one, if you know what I mean. Just a bit easier, but and locations. But a great bit of work, so we'll look forward to watching that because it's obviously very important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so then we'll do the Heinz working group, shall we?
Yeah, we might as well.
So, here. So Phil and Craig and Rhea, is it? Rhea. Thank you. So just want to listen up recommendation. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right, another big bit of work from you guys, and girls and team. So Craig or Maria or Phil, who's ever starting, just into it. Thank you, Maria.
Kia ora, can you hear me okay? Ko Maria Captina ho, ko rangatata te awa, ko huata kere kere te manga, no rira tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. We are here today, along with these gentlemen, and I'll get them to introduce themselves, to talk about the Hindstrains Working Party 5-year progress review, which has just recently been undertaken. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Craig Fleming, farm against the banks of the Hinds River, coastal region. I'm chair of the Hindstrains Working Party, left holding that can after Peter Lowe moved on into HH Wet. So, Phil.
Phil Everest, farming at Flemington, and just a member of the working group party.
Thank you, and like I said, my name's Maria Captain and I work as a Land Management and Biodiversity Advisor at Environment Canterbury here in Ashburton, and ECAN have been facilitating this iteration of a progress review with the Hindstrains Working Party. So what we intend to cover today, hopefully you've all got a copy which was sent around of the report itself and the recommendations which are in colour. I do have some spare copies here if anyone needs them. Help yourself. Just intention is to just present to you what the recommendations were about, how the review was undertaken, and some of the key actions that have come out of it in terms of progress over the last 5 years, and where the Working Party are intending to go next, and how they will use the knowledge and information they now have about where we're at to inform future actions. So just to let you know how the review process happened. So the Hindstrains Working Party was established in 2014, and in 2016 it presented 16 recommendations for improving water quality and quantity in the Hindstrains area. They were presented to the Zone Committee, and for those that haven't seen it, those recommendations are covered in this lovely big book which has got a link in the report, and the review is designed to reference the recommendations and their sub-recommendations, so to be read hand in hand. The progress review was undertaken in June 2022. It was a collaborative process between the Hindstrains Working Party members, Ara Whenua, Environment Canterbury, and other community and industry groups such as MHV. And I acknowledge the work of Donna Lill and Janine Holland from Environment Canterbury in putting together a report and coordinating that. So what we have presented in our report is some background to the recommendations themselves and a summary of what they were, how the progress review was undertaken and who it was done by, and then a summary of the 5 key actions that have come out of the recommendations to date, as well as the colour-coded chart where we have broken down the 16 recommendations, included the 87 sub-recommendations from the book, and pulled out a short summary of what the actions have been to date, just to allow the Hindstrains Working Party to see at a glance where potentially more work may need to be done, or where we can celebrate works that have been ticked off and undertaken. So for reference, we have got a key on page 9 that says what the green ones are. So those are recommendations that have been completed or have been fully achieved. The yellow ones are mostly achieved and or very good progress made to date. The orange coded ones are in progress, still with some work to do. Red ones are not started or not achieved for various reasons. Grey means they were not applicable or eligible yet, and the ones with no colour were still requiring investigation as part of the review. We will go into why some of the recommendations were unable to progress, or maybe relying on other recommendations to be implemented. So it was not just a straightforward, this was done or this wasn't. So interestingly, out of the 16 recommendations and the 87 sub-recommendations, over half of them were the green or yellow phase, so completed, fully achieved, or mostly achieved with very good progress made to date. So that was really encouraging and reflects that strong commitment to carry out the recommendations that's been demonstrated by the community, and shows that they're well underway in the direction of travel required to achieve the overall objective of the Hindstrains Working Party. There were 5 recommendations that had not started or were not achieved for various reasons, and we'll look into those as well. So the intention is not to go through each recommendation and explain the progress made to date, more to be able to receive questions from you if you've had a chance to look over it, but I will highlight those 5 key actions that have happened, which are worth celebrating. So at the start of the report, the first couple of pages, starting from page 3, the summary of key projects that have come out of the recommendations are the Managed Aquifer Recharge and the Near River Recharge trial, which has run since June 2016. We also had the Boundary Drain Adaptive Minimum Flow trial undertaken and has completed its first 5 years of trial. There were in-stream habitat diversity trials undertaken. A community water quality monitoring partnership was established and continues, and the Working Party were able to recommend and implement changes to come through legislation in the Land and Water Regional Plan Change 7. So I will talk briefly now on each of those key actions and what they mean. So the first one being the MAR, Near River Recharge and Targeted Stream Augmentation projects, and I understand that the committee have had a full briefing from Dr. Brett Painter about this, so the intent is not to go back over that, but in terms of how it affects the Hindstrains Working Party, the trials were run since June 2016 in line with the Hindstrain Working Party recommendation. In 2019, the governance group, HH-WET, Hikio Hinds Water Enhancement Trust, was formed to kind of take over the management of it. And the Year 5 report, which has just been presented, there are 18 operational sites that are augmenting groundwater across the Hindstrains area. So MAR, the Managed Aquifer Recharge project itself, since implementation has achieved a new amount of community support, which has allowed them to create targeted rates to fund further expansion of the trial and make it go across a greater scale, hopefully seeing bigger impact across the area. We have observed a reduction in nitrate levels from a 2019 high across the Hikio Hinds Plains catchment as a result of the MAR program, as well as observing an increase in the flow in the Hinds River, which is a positive. The Near River Recharge currently have 2 sites with a 3rd planned at Winslow Road, which is also including a Mahinga Kai component, and it's exciting to work with Arawhenua in the design of that new area. You can read the Year 5 annual report for the HH-WET on page 4 of the report here, so I won't go into that any further. So the second key summary of progress that's happened under these recommendations is the Boundary Drain Adaptive Minimum Flow trial. Craig lives and breathes this every day as one of the consensus holders for it, but as a brief summary, it's run for 5 years from 2017. It's just finished on the 20th March 2022. It is a seasonally varied minimum flow regime, so rather than having a 150 litre per second year-round restriction of water take off Boundary Drain, the trial consent allowed a variable consent from month to month to take between 300 litres per second down to 1,000 litres per second as a minimum flow. And the reason for that was to make sure considerations were there for fish habitat as well as for being able to continue to take critical agricultural water for irrigation. So it involves 12 consent holders. And Craig, would you like to give a little summary of how it's gone?
Yeah. Well, obviously, the trial was set up when we talked originally in the Hindstrains Working Party about minimum flows. Our minimum flow cuttles for irrigation were probably set in the 1990s through collaborative meetings, really just with Fish and Game and farmers and a figure was pulled virtually out of the year that everyone was happy with, and that was how we came to our minimum flow cut-offs. Since the 1990s, obviously, things have changed in the catchment. Water dyke irrigation is significantly reduced, and that has made a fair difference in the lower Hinds area drains on the south side of the Hinds River especially. Also the lack of stock water has reduced flows in the drains. So to come up with, well through the Hindstrains Working Party, we just sort of had discussions and decided that really the minimum flows were not working for the farmers anymore for water takes. So I sat down with Mark Webb from Fish and Game and Adrian Meredith from ECAN, and we came up with the flow sharing regime throughout the year, as Maria has outlined, which also included the fresh protection, where we'd stop irrigation after 25 mils of rain for 24 hours to allow a fresh to go down the drain to hopefully create openness to the sea. Throughout the trial period, disappointingly, I suppose, we had good rains and good flows for 4 of the years. The last year did have low flows, which I think we lost 3 days of irrigation early September because we had a higher cut-off than previous. I think we gained 64 more days of irrigation through that critical crop finishing period. We're just about to finalise, have the report finalised for the last year, and we all decided, well, everyone involved in the trials decided it's been quite a success. Certainly it gives the people on the land more of a connection to the drain and the living life of it, which is a great outcome, really. Going forward, the farmers, we've applied for a consent to carry on with the flow regime, so hopefully we're going to hear about that soon. In the last year, because we'd had low flows during the trial, Mark Webb did a significant project called Ecological Assessment, which is quite a bit of work, where he assessed the drain at the different flow levels and came up with mitigations to have lower flows, which include 50 more weirs in boundary drain, which could mitigate loss of habitat for having lower flows. So the farmers have agreed, if we do get the consent locked in as is, that we would instigate those mitigations, those weirs. What have I missed? That's all good?
That's very good.
Right.
Thank you. Great summary. Just to add to Craig's comments, so the reason the physical habitat monitoring was carried out as part of the trial was to try to understand what the impact would be on fish habitat when the minimum flow went down from 150 as per normal down to 100 litres per second at times per year, and what would need to be done to bring that back up to 150 litre per second level in terms of habitat for fish. So his recommendations out of that report were installation of rock weirs along the other stretches of boundary drain, which will enhance the fish habitat and riffles and pools and things. And as we'll talk on soon, that habitat modelling and trial was another part of the progress that's been undertaken that has been very effective in terms of providing a better habitat for fish. So that was a positive to come out of that boundary drain trial. So currently we've commissioned a final report of the 5-year consented trial, and that is going to help inform the consent process for it, which has a continuation for another 5 years, which is currently with ECAN as is, and the landowners are just working through that. So we're very much interested in getting that trial report, and we'll be sharing it with Zone Committee when it comes, hopefully in the October Zone Committee meeting. And there was also an economic modelling undertaken as part of the boundary drain trial, and it showed that there was an economic benefit from being able to take more water under a variable minimum flow rather than fixed, and it worked out to be $599 EBIT, so earnings before interest and tax per hectare. So there was also that economic advantage to doing it. Yeah. So action point number 3, successful, that's come out of the Hindstrains Working Party recommendations, is the in-stream habitat diversity trials. So this was a trial of several rock weirs in the Windermere and Taylor's drains. These were installed over a couple of days and have led to increased fish habitat diversity and drainage functions for both of these drains. So by installing boulders in an appropriate way and under the correct bylaw, etc., riffles and pools have been created in otherwise straight stretches of drain, which is shown to have benefit for fish spawning and for habitat in general. And Mark Webb again has gone into significant detail, and you can read his report of the types of fish and tuna that enjoy different habitats in terms of pools or fast moving water. So by varying the habitat, it's shown that there is a much wider application for use of this technique in other drains in the Hinds area and potentially across New Zealand as well, which is quite an exciting outcome. Key action number 4 that's come out is a community water quality monitoring program. So community engagement across the Hindstrain Working Party has been really excellent over the last 5 years and continues. So as part of this, one of the recommendations was that 27 sites are monitored for flow and water quality across the Hindstrains area, and this has been supported by industry partners such as Fish and Game, FAR, Beef and Lamb, Dairy New Zealand, and it's also supported by McFarlane Rural Business and Environment Canterbury. There has been a pledge for further monitoring for this out to 2026, and one of the key benefits is that it's allowing a joint ownership of data amongst all of these people in addition to just the ECAN monitoring sites, and it's furthering the scientific understanding of water quality and quantity across the Hinds drains. The final key action is implementation of plan changes into the Land and Water Regional Plan. So some changes have been included in Plan Change 7 under the Ashburton Section 13. So Plan Change 7 is currently notified, which will be giving effect to some of the Hindstrains Working Party recommendations. And these include the recognition of managed aquifer recharge as a tool to improve water quality and quantity. It will include a minimum flow and allocation regime for Eiffelton irrigation scheme drains. So that's going to be similar to what has been trialled under Boundary Drain. An extension to 2030 for flow and allocation limits for other Hinds drains, and mandatory stock exclusion for the main and secondary Hinds drains. So formalising that into legislation will allow for more compliance follow-up, not just voluntary landowner actions. So yes, we invite any questions and comments about the recommendation reviews themselves and the status of how we have graded them. We acknowledge that there are 5 recommendations, sub-recommendations that have not been actioned yet, and we are happy to answer questions about why that is. And our final remarks will be just around what's going to happen next for the Hindstrains Working Party, how this information from the review will be used, and move forward from there.
Thank you, Liz. Question?
Yep. I've actually got 2, and both are do with Mangakai. The rock weirs in the water flows, does that affect the passage for fish?
So they're not a fish barrier, they are designed to have the water continuously running over them, but just by reducing the speed of the water and changing the velocity down the centre, they end up creating pools afterwards, so they do not...
It's quite shallow water going over the top, if any at all. It's going between the rocks. But I just wonder if there's going to be some type of barrier.
That's traditional flow for that particular drain. It's a Windermere drain, as I understand it. If you look at it, the way in which, and so we probably should be clear, the way that rock weir was created was that the pool was originally behind the rocks. The flood came through, pushed the shingle up behind, it's now created a pool in front. We've fished that let's call it 4 weeks ago. I can't remember when it was. Mine's blurred a little bit. Oh, sorry, Fish and Game electric-fished it to show what's happening. There is no doubt that the change in the stream characteristics have made a big difference to the actual species, or sorry, the concentration of a species in the number of species in those pools, and the community is actually currently under the way of planting, further planting to actually shade some of those areas to see whether we can enhance it still further without detrimentally affecting the flow of the stream. So I think in answer to Mahinga Kai, this particular drain wasn't planned for Mahinga Kai harvest, although it may be.
Sorry, but I'm not talking about harvest. I'm talking about the movement of Mahinga Kai. Movement of fish, not harvesting them.
Sorry, okay. No, I meant as I meant in press and things. Sorry, in terms of fish, to date, the numbers have slightly increased, but it's still early days.
Okay, I can't see them really working properly for some of the native fish, maybe the trout and things like that, the dogfish, yes. And the other one is I'm quite disappointed in the one of the red ones, the Lakehood mudfish project. It's not been looked at or anything by the looks of it. I mean, quite disappointed that they are a species that's really on a decline, and this mudfish there, it should be one of the first ones to look at and get it right.
Yeah, thank you for that question. The reason that we looked at that site originally was so that, so to be specific, it's the outflow from Lake Hood and a smallish wetland to the south of that outflow. I actually was involved in walking the stream and the river with Doc at the time. It was an area where we thought there was an opportunity, but it required a fish barrier or trout barrier, if you like, from the river coming back up. We've since used other areas to try and enhance the mudfish, specifically higher in the catchment, to actually make sure we've got that established. It's not an area that we have saying we won't do, but at the moment we've put our priorities into other things. But we do need to deal with the fish barrier coming in, and that was the challenge that Doc put to us at the time.
Is there mudfish actually there?
There were no mudfish there, but it was a good habitat. And the reason that we looked at it, the reason that we looked at it was because we thought it was an accessible area to the public, and it was quite an area of accessible wetland, or potential wetland, sorry.
So thank you for your question, Les. It has not progressed to date, but that doesn't mean it won't progress. And one of the points of this review was to allow the Hindstrains Working Party some clarity on where they're at, and to start those discussions again on where the priorities should be moving forward now that I guess these key 5 big things have pushed through. So you welcome that feedback, thank you. There's also, just for your awareness, mudfish are being introduced in the Upper Hinds near River Recharge site as part of this as well.
Yeah, congratulations team on doing a review and listened to the early reports way back and thinking there's a lot of things to put some stuff on the bones, but well done. The rock weir, just a point of clarification, the zone committee actually contributed out of our biodiversity funding as a trial way back, didn't it?
Yes, I bet it was around the $5,400 mark. I think that is listed somewhere.
Yeah, I was just sort of bringing that to the point that it was actually we contributed to try and see if there was benefits in doing that as a trial. So yeah, that's good that you've reported on that.
Yep, thank you.
The other one is probably Craig, it's more, is around the variable flows. Was one of the things was trying to increase, what was it, whitebait spawning times at the certain times of the month or something. Is that correct?
I forget all the dates for the species, but that is why we've certainly got the different flows, higher flows in that September time than what we had originally, and again in March too. So I forget.
Do you know if there's been any benefit, or has anyone followed up on it? So to do the depth of water, don't they spawn up on the grasses or something higher at the fuller flow or something? Is that right? Full moon or something? Or?
Yeah, that's going on grasses along the, not on the grasses, but right along the side of the river. On one side, that they're up here spawning, and that's the end stage here to the next water comes down, and wash them off back into the river.
Okay.
So thank you for the question. We're hopeful that the boundary drain report, which is currently being written, will answer that for you. So hopefully be able to present that to you next time in answer to that question.
Good. And just a really, really dumb question, because I'm just a bit political from time to time. Stock exclusion regulations. There's all sorts of stuff around that at the moment. Are we talking about when there's new fences going up, are they post and batten or just 2 wires? Because the regulations talks about post and batten fences, which is a North Island thing, or you've got to have 2 hot wires. So how's the Hindstrains working party, or are you just saying common sense is applying here? It's a political question.
Yeah. What do you know about
The latter, common sense is applying, and the reason for that is that these drones still require some cleaning, and obviously post and batten fence makes it pretty difficult on both sides.
Craig, I think the question's probably for you or Maria, but so you said you've got a recommendation to ECAN, is it, or an application in foot to continuation of the irrigation consent?
Yes.
The lever. So how's that progressing? When's that meant to be? When are you expecting a result from that? Or
we're just on hold at the moment. We're on section 92 to the 20th September. ECAN wanted more information. Kimberly Dines at ECAN has rejigging a report that she had written, and hopefully that'll answer the questions that ECAN had.
And in the meantime, is the current consent compliant until the new one is issued? Is that what happens?
We assume so.
Is that, Maria, do you assume?
My understanding is that they're sort of continuation, which means that the exact same conditions that have applied continue to apply under the stage.
Because I understand, obviously, with the elections and everything coming up, there's a bit of a backlog with consents, and so consents are allowed to be kept being used until, and if they're not being heard, if they haven't been settled.
In this particular case, where they have applied for the exact same consent again, they were allowed to continue it, but that does not apply to all consents, is my understanding. It has to fit this particular continuance category.
Right, thank you. That's good. Any other questions? Well, that's good. It's it's an ongoing project. You've done well, Craig and Phil, and nice to have Maria on board, and look forward to seeing final recommendations at some stage.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to finish off with just what's going to be next with this review and how it will be used. So Hindstrains Working Party intend to discuss this project review with their wider members, so that will come up in the annual partners meeting that's coming soon, with the intention to set and prioritise actions and pull in the catchment collective as well to help progress things moving forward.
Yeah, good.
The next formal progress review is planned for 2 to 3 years' time, so somewhere around the 2024-25 mark, which will also include a review of the validity of the recommendations. So you'll see in our summary that some of the recommendations were unable to be completed because good management practice may have moved on since they were originally written. So in order to actually reflect progress and understand what the priorities should be, those will be looked at too, which I think will be very useful. So the Hindstrains Working Party will before they set and prioritise their actions moving forward, are going to wait for the Environment Canterbury annual water quality monitoring results, as well as the state of the environment for that Hekio Hinds catchment report, which is due in October from Kimberly Dines, as well as the boundary drain trial final report, which should be coming any day now. So those this and those 2 pieces of information will be informing as well as our engagement with Arowhenua and the partners about where they see the priorities being. So that's what's going to happen next.
Great, excellent. Oh, well,
We probably just seek some feedback from the zone committee. Really, is just in comparison of other zones. Where do we stand with this sort of work? Are we lagging? We need to do more.
I'm not sure I can answer that, but I'm not sure if any other zone has another Hindstrains Working Party type group, but it seems pretty outstanding what you guys have done. in terms of organising this and getting it done and making all this progress. But it could be a good model for some other places that have got some issues.
If it helps, I've mentioned the Hindstrains Working Party to everyone around the country I've spoken to. When there's a problem, the best way to fix it is get the locals involved, whether it be local runanga, whether it's the farmers, whatever, and actually sit around the table and talk out what the problems are, what the solutions are. And I've stood you guys up as a really good showcase of what has worked, because you mightn't have delivered on all your recommendations, but you're delivering on a hell of a lot of them, and you're doing it, and you're just getting on and getting it done. So you've got to be congratulated for what you've achieved so far.
Thank you.
I suppose one example I can think of is in the Upper Waitaki, the Ahaweri, they have a problem with the TLI of Lake Benmore, and they've set up a catchment group there to take action on that. So similar thing, but nowhere near as complex, I think, as what you guys have got.
I think what's really interesting, Craig, is that there's very few places like the Hinds and the rest of New Zealand where there's so many open drains flowing through. So I hope you've got it painted in that document, because I think a lot of people copy it. So thank you very much.
I think there is another printing just been done, isn't there?
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. What's next?
We could do a little report on.
To do the tree removal. We might as well go through the reports and do the minutes at the end. And just carry on.
Yeah.
So you doing the Wakaneri pine tree removal?
Yeah.
Okay. So Dave's going to do the Wakaneri pine tree removal report.
Cool. Thank you.
11. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, Bill. This is really just a very brief report to let you know. The Zone Committee recommended $4,000 funding to help with the cost of pine tree removal from Wakaneri Hapua, and it was 26 trees, I think, removed. Kristen from ADC, and he is, I think, on our team's line here, so if Kristen wants to chip in, please do. He's just given us this report. It came in a little bit cheaper, which is good, and they've had the work done, and they're going to sell the firewood, which will go towards paying for some native plants. So I thought that's a good outcome. So it was really just an update to give you an idea of the work that was done. Some trees have been left to provide some shelter for new plantings, but there's been a big clean out. I do know that Val, who is here with us, has got some pictures that she would like to show us as well of recent changes at the Hapua when we've had all this rain. Val, do you want to load those up now? Christian, did you want to speak to this at all? Doesn't. If he is speaking, he's muted. Okay, I'll just make sure Val's all right.
Okay. Yeah. We're struggling.
I know what you're going to do. You're just going to do the formalities of the meeting in about 10 minutes flat, and then claim that as a record, ain't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you work.
That's good. And you'll help.
Go, you're online.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for having me here again. I just wanted to show you last time or the time before I was here, there was a comment made when Wakanui was being compared with a suggestion for a wetland somewhere in the Hinds area, that it would be better to put the money towards something that had some water in it rather than something that didn't. Well, if you get the chance, go down and have a look at Wakaneri now, because it looks great. It looks as good as I've ever seen it. And it's fresh water this time. Sometimes it fills up with salt water, but this time it's fresh water. And I just want to show you what happens when the water's in there. So my first visit after the water turned up, there were 4 black-fronted dotterels, which are quite rare along this coastline. And some pied stilts there as well. And if the conditions are good, the pied stilts will actually nest at Wakaneri. A week later, we just arrived and 20 pied stilts flew in and had a play in the hapua and just mucked around there for about an hour and then flew out again. A pied oyster catcher came in, had a good old splash around as well, and there were 2 of them that day. So it was great to just sit and watch them. And then we were down there last weekend and there were 5 grey teal there as well. And this is just through in the Digby's farm, just through the fence line. And the banded dotterels are coming back as well. So suddenly the water comes back and the birds come back. And I'm just hoping that the water will keep dribbling in over the summer and that all this biodiversity will flourish down there. And, you know, I think I've said this before, that when the water's there, the birds come back. And there weren't only birds there. Every time I go down there, there's people coming and going. Some people come down and they'll go out on the beach and fish. Others walk up and down the beach, and others just sit there and watch the waves. So there are always people at Wakaneri. So it's not only important for the biodiversity, and I've described to you before there are over 50 species of insects down there and about 20 species of native birds. So that biodiversity already being there is what's important about Wakaneri. And I think you've got the photos in your handout there about where the trees are going, the new trees are going. So this area has been, it's still a bit rough, but we will get in there and plant. So there's going to be kānuka, kowhai and cabbage trees planted along that back fence line with Ross Digby's farm. And this is the lagoon at the moment, and I think you walked through here, Bill, and when it was drier, and there's weed trees in here, there's alders grown in here that have now died and are falling over, so it's not the prettiest place in the world, but there is raupo and some other native grasses growing in there, and there was a report done about the ownership of this bit of land. I think you've got that, Dave. And I don't want to ask the difficult questions, but I just would like you to think about how Wakaneri is at the moment when there's water there. So I think that's all I want to say today.
Val, thanks for your time and taking the photos. And quick question: the water that's coming in, is that coming from underneath the ground and coming in, or is it flowing through the old drain to the paddock? How's the water arriving?
Well, it's a bit of a mystery, really, but I think it probably is just seeping through the ground. Right. And you can see across at Valverde Road, there's quite a big scour out there where the water's come down. There's quite a big ditch coming down the terrace on the north side. Yeah. And I suspect that quite a bit of water has come through there, and Ross did say it comes through from that slightly higher terrace. But it's interesting to hear Les too talking about the whitebait, because this was a favourite whitebaiting spot in years gone by, and John Wilkie used to talk about he and his granddad going there and going whitebaiting, and so it fits a lot of the criteria that you guys are working towards, the biodiversity, the mahinga kai, and the recreation side of it as well.
Certainly looks a different beast with the water in there, doesn't it?
It certainly is, yes.
Is there any other questions for Val? James?
Kia ora, Val. There is the note in there that the money from the firewood sales will go towards replanting. Is that correct? Can we? This is a sign of what's coming next. In declaring a conflict with Arawhenua, but can I ask that when plants, or if it's going to be natives are sourced, that they consider approaching Arawhenua Native Nursery to source those plants, and also Liz, you might be able to help, but the one up in Motu, is it Motu Karara? Yeah, that Taumotu are partnered with as well. Just considering approaching those two outfits and getting quotes and prices and things like that.
I think we're one step ahead of you there, because I've been with the guys, with Lex and the staff from Arawhenua Nursery, and we've collected seed at Wakaneri already, and at 5 Star, so, and at the Harris Reserves. So we've already made friends with them.
Then maybe I should withdraw my conflict then, because I'm not advocating for anything there.
You want to file?
Yeah, oh, no. Thanks, Val.
We're hoping to visit them quite soon, and just to see how they're getting on, and yeah. So,
right.
Thank you.
Excellent, Val. Thank you very much for your time. Well, so that's virtually got through all the.
Yes.
So we'll go backwards now.
Go back to the.
We'll start with the minutes, will we?
Yes. So you'd expect to declare the meeting open now, eh?
So I'd like to. We do have a quorum. We've had one since Sydney was on the line.
Yes.
Still there, hopefully.
Yes.
Great. So we've got the minutes from the last meeting, and I think, Artie, you've talked to Carol as an amendment to make. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is a small correction to the minutes, and Carl can go over it.
There was just a suggestion from Artie that was omitted from putting in the minutes, so there'll be a new section put in saying the issue of improved communication with the public regarding the committee's activities was raised at the meeting, with the suggestion of a dedicated Facebook page being established with investigations to be undertaken as to whether the practicalities of that can happen. So I apologise it was omitted, but it'll go in amendment.
So I think you need to move that amendment.
Yeah, I'll move that.
We've got a seconder for that amendment from James. All those in favour? Aye. Against? You're against?
No, if it's not any personal information, I don't use that type of media at all.
Yeah.
And I don't have nothing to do with Facebook.
That's fine.
Any personal information.
Yeah. That's fine, Liz, but what we're just recording what was said at the meeting is, yeah, no, that's fine. So you're happy for it to be recorded, but you're not in favour of it? Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fine. So it's been moved and seconded, and all those in favour voted yes, and so that's carried. So we'll now move the minutes for adoption. Yes.
I can make a wee comment on that. It's just a follow-up thing, just for your information. I've talked to Ecological Comms about the options here, and what we'd like to do is in the next couple of months get someone from our digital comms team to come and talk to the zone committee about what the options are for a Facebook page or whatever. Yeah.
I understand what you're saying, Liz.
Yeah.
It's got to be run. Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah. Okay. Strike that for so I'd like to, so I'll move the minutes to be accepted. Do we have a seconder for that? James will do that. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Any matters arising that haven't been discussed, or so that what David mentioned will probably be a matter arising about about the All West statement. Follow up. Thanks, Carol. What's next?
That might the register interest. Carol, can you just remember me as an extra board member if you're okay? I'm now free and independent.
You'll notice you always were, I thought, Chris.
Carol, can you also take off Simpson Gresson for me? I've finished up formally with them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Also free and independent.
Okay, so that's good. So, any correspondence, David?
Not that I'm aware of.
Does anyone correspondence? No, that's good. That's in wood as well. None of that. Public level. So, we've got the election of officers.
Yep.
I suppose it depends, yeah.
So shall I run that?
Yeah.
Okay, take this thing off. So you've got a paper on that. What we want to do is elect our chair and deputy chair for the year. And before we do that, we have to agree on a method to do that. And there's, you'll see in your paper, there's System A and System B. And it's just about what we do. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, but we have to vote on whether we have System A or System B. System B is really just a one round of voting, and if two more candidates tie, then the tie is resolved by a lot. System A is a bit more convoluted, but what would people like?
The one that has a clear majority.
Yep.
Probably System A, isn't it?
Well, the way I understand it is System A is essentially preferential voting and System B is first past the post.
Yes, probably good.
B is easier, A is more complex, but you get a clear majority. I don't have a, and in saying that, I don't have a favoured system. I'm happy to go with the group's decision.
I suppose just is the committee happy to go ahead with doing a chairman's vote or nomination?
It was circulated in the minutes, everyone else put their apology in.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think so.
Where it's going to happen, so.
Okay, cool. So we're going with System...
I think that's System A, because the person who has got over 50% of the support of the committee.
Okay.
The other way is just it's going to be a minority, and I don't think that's healthy.
Okay. Rightio. In that case,
That's just my opinion.
Well, should I go and sit down there somewhere?
no, you can stay there. You just can't say anything until I let you. Okay, so I'll call for nominations then for the position of chair. Do I have any nominations?
I could nominate Bill Thomas. Yes, I will.
Do we have a seconder for Bill Thomas? Ardy is the seconder. Do we have any other nominations? Oh, Sydney's got her hand up.
Now, I was just going to nominate Bill, but someone done first.
Thank you, Sydney.
Thanks, Sydney.
Any other nominations? In that case, we don't need to vote. Congratulations, Bill. You're our chair again.
Well, thank you. I don't presume anything, but I'm happy to do another year anyway, so thank you for your support.
Cool.
Yeah, I've got a clap.
Thanks, Sydney.
Now, are there any nominations for deputy chair?
Anyone else?
So we have a nomination of James from Les. We'll need a seconder for that. Ardy has seconded that. Do we have any other nominations?
Right, does Chris want to stand? Or?
Oh, Chris.
Do you want to, Chris? I'll nominate you.
That's fine. I'm happy.
Can I withdraw and nominate Chris? Because I've got a lot on.
Okay, so you would like, James would like to withdraw.
Chris would like me to nominate him.
Chrissy.
I'm comfortable if I'm available, but if you're busy.
Is that okay with you? Yeah, I'd like to nominate Chris if that's possible.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll second Chris.
Yeah, and I'll withdraw mine.
Okay, so James is withdrawing his nomination, nominating Chris Allen, and Stuart is our seconder for that.
Yeah.
Do we have any other nominations? No. So that is carried then, and congratulations, Chris.
I think we should have gone for System B.
I'll hand back to our new old chair.
New old chair. Oh, thanks for that, and that's good. I mean, what are we doing? So what's next?
What is next?
Which episode?
Chair, we run through everything really.
It's quite quick.
I think we're basically.
Okay.
Can I just suggest for our next meeting that, perhaps someone from the groundwater team update on, we've had a really wet winter.
Yeah.
What's the latest state of the nation when it comes to aquifers? What have we learnt? And I think they've got a report coming out soon, so it'd be quite good to have one of the water team to come and update us.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I've also been made aware from a few farmers that have rung that the consent process at the moment through ECAN is very slow, and especially if they're independent irrigators, because the schemes are getting, they're well financed, well resourced, getting through the schemes while an independent people are struggling. So I wouldn't mind just an update from ECAN about how the consent process is tracking. Are they on track? Is everyone getting a fair opportunity to put their consents, etc.?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Anything else for the next?
Just local body elections. How does that affect what we do, and to when do we function again, given regional councils' votes and district councils?
I'll give you an update on that. I was just about to say that. So the September and October meetings can't be official meetings because of local body elections. We can still meet, have workshops, do field trips or whatever, but we can't have an official zone committee meeting during that period. So for these updates you're wanting, are you happy for them to be just coming into more of a workshop format, or do you want them to be officially received?
Well, we're not going to make any decisions.
No.
Yes. I'm actually a councillor until the election day. Present councillors are still councillors until the 8th of October.
Okay.
You're not disenfranchised.
No.
It's just the rules, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
I think it's just the rules of
ECAN.
We can't have those two.
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's what I've been advised by further up the food chain anyway. That we can't do
They
that.
said that last meeting, didn't they?
Yeah. We're not allowed. I think coming back, the show weekend is about the cut-off for when we're allowed to start again. Once new councillors are on board and have been inducted and are allocated to the zone committees. Yeah.
So the plan was to finish this meeting and have a bit of a workshop, and I think that's a good idea with what's here. So this is
coffee or something if you're going to have a workshop at the same time.
It will have a
working
but that'll be the end of this minute. We'll get a cup of tea in a minute. So James, if you could do karakia just to close the meeting, please. Officially.
I have one update.
Yeah.
It's on the Require Enhancement Society. I was in place with Jen, and I said there was only one application came in, is for Boat Creek at Require for 35,000.
Yeah.
And I said the Expert and Zone Committee would back that. And one other thing on it, the Sol Maihura Zone Committee, all our members, apart from myself, only been there for 1 year.
Yeah.
So we've asked if we could have one of our members who had just gone off, who's the chair of the Require Enhancement, that he stays on as a zone committee member, but not as a member.
Yeah.
Do we have any objections to that?
No, we don't. No, well, I certainly don't.
But we are part of that as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's fine. John?
One quick update from Doc. Done to the General Manager of the European Office a couple of weeks ago. So Tony Preston was the acting manager of the European Office.
Thank you. Okay, James.
Kia tātou katoa te atu whauta tata areki e hukraiti. Me te aroa te atu me te whiwhinga teitau ki tuaru tapu, ake, amen.
Thank you.